Okay, this is it. So today we're going to be discussing Asana. It's always an interesting conversation when we discuss Asana because we already sort of have an idea of what it is. And so I'm looking forward to a lively discussion. But before we move on to Asana, we'll just do a quick recap of last week, yamas and niyamas. I think we covered the yamas in quite detail. Non-harming, ahimsa, so non-violence to yourself and others, truthfulness, non-stealing, continence or restraint, brahmacharya, and aparigraha, non-covetous, no envy or not wanting what another has. So non-coveting. Okay, these are basically the yamas and niyamas. Do we have any questions about the yamas? Yeah. Okay, we'll just move on quickly to a recap of the niyamas. So the yamas and niyamas are the second limb of the Yoga Sutras. So cleanliness or purity is the first niyama or the first restraint. So we need to ensure that our bodies, our environment, our planet is in a state of purity that we think is conducive to our well-being as well as the well-being of others. So this is this entire idea that we need to ensure that our environment is also conducive to our own well-being. But when it comes to our yoga practice, it becomes really important to ensure that your environment is conducive to your practice. Contentment is really, we discussed it briefly last week, but contentment is adjusting these rules so that they give you a sense of contentment, so that you are living the life that you want to be living. So that, you achieve the goals that you want to achieve. There's no rules, there's no external rules. And where the contentment comes in is that you have to personalize and embody all of the virtues and restraints so that you develop a sense of contentment and your conscience is clear. Right. And then when we talk about tapas is about discipline. It's about self-discipline. It's about focus. Tapas is heat. It's about generating heat to burn away anything that holds us back from achieving our highest ideals. So yoga, especially asana, is seen as a form of tapas. Now, the niyamas are important because all the niyamas actually directly relate to an asana practice, right? So the environment, the fact that, yoga asana is never about competition. It's about honoring your body. It's about doing what's right for you. It's almost about not paying attention to the person next to you, but focusing inwardly and internally. So you're paying attention to your own body. And this is, the tapas as well is doing that consistently to ensure that you're working through your limitations, even if your asana looks very different to the person next to you. And then we come to this whole idea of self-study. Now, self-study is about introspection. It's about introception. It's about looking inwardly. It's about questioning. It's that internal dialogue. But it also relates directly to asana, to actually understanding where your mind is with the asana, because we can fake it. We can pretend to be still, we can from the outside. But the whole idea with asana becoming yoga that we're going to discuss today is that idea that, your practice is as true as you make it. If you're faking it, then that's a fake practice. It's a plastic yoga practice. It's not real. And the idea of Ishvara Pranidhana is surrendering to your highest potential with humility. So whatever your highest ideal is, and when we talk about the highest ideal, it's about all these yamas and niyamas coming together to create your highest ideal, what feels right for you, what fills you with contentment, and then surrendering to that. Now, this, the next part of this, and we've discussed it, Patanjali talks about suffering is an inherent feature of human existence. Right? Remember, the whole Sadhana Pada, the whole second part, is how to alleviate the suffering. And the 8 limbs are different, are the, I don't want to call them steps because they don't have to be up a ladder. They can be, there's 8 limbs, you have to use them together. So they're almost like concentric. There's like a circle around the central aspect, which is yoga. And with every practice, we tend to focus on one of the 8 limbs. But the aim of all of the 8 limbs and the idea of yoga itself, stilling the fluctuations of the mind, is to overcome human suffering. Because for as long as the mind is fluctuating, they will be suffering or they will be tolerating the suffering, but there'll never be no suffering. Now, this is, something else, something that comes, this is different because the material world is always changing. The physical world is always changing. It will only lead to misery. Our bodies change constantly. We talk about signs of aging. We talk about, signs of stagnation, but because things are always changing and, we all know this, right? With food, nothing tastes as good as that first bite. Because things change. As soon as we've had the first bite and we've had that pleasurable experience, as humans, we almost set up the expectation for what the next thing should be like. And if it doesn't taste the same for whatever reason, it leads to disappointment. And due to this material world ever changing and, us being with these mental fluctuations, us being prone to suffering, our lives, unless we learn how to deal with these mental fluctuations, are going to result in suffering. Now, this is it, in Sadhana Pada, he also goes on to talk about how suffering is due to latent impressions, memories, or expectation. And we're going to talk a little more about these latent impressions. See, all those fluctuations in the mind come from latent impressions. And if we do not learn how to still them, they lead to even more latent impressions. The other important thing that's brought out, because, is that's brought out in this sutra, is when you look deeply at the world, when you really pay attention to the phenomena of the world, one attribute always contradicts the other. This world is made up of one contradiction after the other. And we all look at things, if you're looking for, say, the perfect charity to donate to, or the perfect cause to align with, if we look deep enough, there will be something that is not absolutely perfect. There will be things that contradict each other. Now, if you think about also projected forward in the long term, no matter what we do to correct, to make things right now, will have some sort of effect into, if we project it into the future. And if you're discriminating, you actually start to see how actions that seem positive now may actually be negative in years to come. And talking about all these latent impressions that have future consequences, all of this thought, or these sutras 15 to 19 in this particular chapter, alludes to samskaras. Now, samskaras are talked about in many of the earlier texts, in many of the Upanishads, etc. And what Patanjali is alluding when he talks to these when he talks about these impressions, he's alluding to these samskaras. Now, samskaras are mental impressions, physiological imprints, or physical formations. Physical formations means these impressions give rise to physical effects in our bodies and the world around us. And samskaras are directly related to the karma theory. Now, the idea behind this is that every action thought, intention, or sensation leaves a samskara, leaves an impression on the body, an imprint that can alter not just our mindset, but our physical body. And these impressions, these latent impressions, even if they're, you know, these impressions, even if they're completely unconscious, they can, you know, they can affect our lives. They come to volitional fruition in our future. You know, they come up when we least expect them. Hidden desires, some subconscious fears, etc. They're all coming from these latent subconscious impressions, sensations, imprints, things that we were just exposed to at any point in our lives. And these samskaras can manifest as, you know, everything that we talk about when we talk about karma comes from these samskaras. Subliminal impressions, habits, innate, you know, dispositions, innate, even, you know, this can be even positive, you know, innate abilities, innate skills, etc. Positive and negative come from these samskaras. Now, in the ancient texts, in the really old texts, the theory of samskaras explains how and why humans actually remember things. You know, we talked last week and the week before about memories, and the effects of these memories can either cause suffering, happiness, or contentment, right? But it's how you remember them and how you choose to use those memories. So any questions about samskaras?
Suffering.
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, so if it's a learning, whether it's physical or mental, is something that happens from childhood.
Yeah.
So, but how do you, as a child, you can't control certain things, can you? You don't have the innate ability, because I'm assuming you're saying that it could be good or bad.
Yeah. So the thing is, what they're saying here is that everything, as human beings, everything from the moment, you know, from even before the time we're born, because we're dependent on genetics, we're dependent on these impressions that our parents and our ancestors were exposed to, that shaped them, that shaped our genes. So yeah, we're born with these samskaras. We're the ones that we're born with, and the ones that to largely occur in childhood, we know we have a limited control over them happening.
Right.
But what we need to do is understand how we can undo them. And this is where Asana leads to. This is what he's talking about, all these impressions, and then he's going to give us the tools. Now we can't, you know, you can't go back and wipe it off. You can't go back and change your childhood, but you have to know that everything that happened then, positive and negative, impacts you now. Unless you learn, you make the unconscious conscious, you face them, you resolve them if they need to be resolved. You learn how to use them if they're a positive ability. Because, you know, there's also this idea within yoga that if you have an innate ability and you don't use it, it turns to poison. So if you're good at something and you don't make good on it, it will eventually haunt you. It'll eventually become your poison because of the regret that may follow. Does that make sense, Seema?
No, that makes sense. It just makes me feel totally confused about how much information there is that the human mind has to deal with.
Unbelievable, isn't it? How much we take in, how much is stored, not just in the mind, the body, because, you know, what we're going to go on talking about is it's, you know, we think that memories are stored somewhere in the brain. We store memories throughout the body, you know, we have genetic material throughout the body. And what is a gene if it's not memory?
But it's also that, you know, we discussed it last week, is deciding what's good and what's bad. And I know that we discussed that last, so I won't discuss it again, but deciding which memories to hold on to, well, not to hold on to, but to use them for the betterment of your next phase of your life, I suppose.
Exactly. And this is where, you know, he started talking about the discrimination. the discernment, the discrimination, you having to learn how to develop that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, Poonam, you had a question.
The premise of this section is that suffering is an experience that we're trying to avoid. Isn't suffering essential for some aspects of your development, like empathy, like also understanding when things are good, because you have then something to contrast it against? So is suffering something to be avoided necessarily?
No, not at all. Because, the truth is all these sensations, every single one of them, we characterize them. In essence, pain and anxiety and happiness and joy, the physiological sensations, we give them categories, and then we decide this is good and this is bad, and that needs to be avoided and this needs to be avoided. These are our own makings. It's judgment. It's a judgment that we create. So while all impressions, if we look at it, when we talk about these samskaras, yes, in one way we can say every single samskara that we've been exposed to, every single impression, can only help us grow as a person, good or bad. And that's the truth. If you look at it from that way, even if they were painful, they help us grow. So that's one way of looking at it. Suffering is positive. Pain is positive. But if we allow ourselves to get trapped in that pain, then we allow ourselves to suffer. So while every sensation, everything that we were exposed to is a stepping stone for growth, is a catalyst for growth, we need to see it that way, because it can either limit us or it can propel us into something greater. So, the idea of overcoming suffering, to a large degree, that comes from, that's more Buddhist. In the yoga philosophy, it's be aware of it and then don't allow it to cause mental fluctuations. Does that make sense, Poonam?
I don't know, because I feel that if you experience an emotion, whether it be suffering or happiness, whatever, it's if you don't have the fluctuation, the mental fluctuation, are you really experiencing the emotion? And actually, I actually enjoy all my emotions, even the suffering sometimes. So it sounds really.
This is it. The whole thing about being in the moment. In the moment, go through that emotion with awareness.
Okay.
But tomorrow, if you're allowing the emotion from yesterday to cloud your mind so you don't experience your moment tomorrow, then you're cheating yourself of another good moment.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
So in summary, experience, but aware.
Experience the now.
Yeah.
Always experience the now. Don't allow these impressions, memories to cloud the now or the future. That's the expectations that they talk about. Any other questions? There was somebody else that started asking a question.
So I'm trying to understand this.
Mm-hmm.
It is quite tricky to get to. So whatever we do, we are constantly, you say every action, intent or sensation leaves a samskara. And as you say, it's even more, it's genetically, we are embodied sort of memory and history. But then what you just said was, it's important though to keep living in the minute and not live in history, as it were.
Yeah.
So you have this accumulation of things. And presumably the longer you exist, the bigger the accumulation. But are you saying that despite that massive accretion of actions, intentions, sensations, body, genetics, you have to not fall into the past. You have to keep being alert to the present.
Yes.
So you mustn't sort of, you must constantly put in the effort not to be defined by what has happened, but to keep attentive to what's happening now. Is that what
That's it? Absolutely. To be attentive to what's happening now, to, to react in a way that's true for you now, to not be habitual, to not allow these past accretions to actually jeopardize your now in any way. Of course, in the same light, if something from the past is positive, that makes the now more effective, if you've developed higher perception in the past, and that higher perception allows you to appreciate the now more fully, then yes, you have the choice to appreciate that. But this is where, don't allow the past limitations, the past that prevented growth, to impact the now. And this is where the discrimination comes in, where do you want to grow? What do you want to develop? What's in keeping with your intention for the moment, for the now?
But is it possible to ever shed things, or are they always with you? You're just being discriminating about how you live in the moment. I mean, is there always just this bedrock and history of everything that's ever, every action, intent, or sensation is there, but you're trying to
the things that happen in the past have happened in the past. But when we allow them to control us, and even if it's unconsciously controlling our behavior, they say when you've truly forgiven, it's not that you don't remember, but it doesn't limit you from enjoying the now.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's that idea, when you've dealt with it, when you've let it go, when you found your santosha, your contentment with it, then it's there, but it doesn't bother you anymore. You're not coming, I think with Maslow, he talks about, the deficiency needs. Are we acting from a deficiency need that has come from our past? Or are we acting from a being need because we've made peace with our past?
Yeah, that was very helpful. The example of forgiving, that really helped to give a tangible example of what this is for me anyway. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. So shall we move on to number 16? Now, the whole thing is, we've just discussed this. We all have these samskaras that leads to pain, but it is possible, while we may experience the pain, it is possible to prevent the suffering. The pain is the here and now, but remembering the pain tomorrow, that's suffering, especially if the pain isn't physically there. So, between 17 and 18 gives us these three basic ways. The way to achieve this, the way to overcome the pain, is to allow the seer, that is us, to understand his perception. For us to understand what we're perceiving in the now and what is coming from our past. And this way, the world that we perceive can have an identity that is illuminated, active, or still. This is where we start talking about the three gunas that we're going to go into. Now, everything in the material world, consists of material elements, but also our sense perception of these material elements. So not only, is there physical structures in the world, right? We also have to be aware that the way we perceive any physical structure, even our own bodies, is based on our perception. This is the idea. Is your perception biased or is it clear? And depending on how well you can see this, so you understand your own impressions that lead to biases, you can actually choose how to react to it, whether you can make this, because if anything, no matter how painful it is, if it becomes a catalyst for growth, then it leads to enjoyment and higher functioning. But if you're going to wallow in the pain and feel sorry for ourselves, then it just leads to suffering. So it's, it's a thing that happened. The real material thing or physical thing could have happened, but how we perceive it, we can change it. We can change how it affects our lives. And in Sutra 19, he talks directly about the gunas, or the material attributes. They can have, the material world can be clear, can have clear characteristics, be free of characteristics, or we can imbue it with so much of meaning that completely changes what the material substance is. Okay, so we're just going to spend a little bit, we've done this before, I think, when we did the philosophy lecture the last time, but the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Now, in terms of, while we all always talk about sattva, the element of harmony, clarity, purity, in order for us to live in this world, we need rajas and tamas. We need the movement and the heat. We need the inertia to sleep and to heal and relax. So we need a little bit of inertia, right? So the whole aim is that he's talking about here, everything that's happened in our past can lead us to inertia. It can lead us to be reactive, as in rajas, or it can lead us to a state of harmony and clarity. But in your state of harmony or clarity, if you want to make a positive change, assuming you review a situation very, very calmly, and you think, actually that is not right, and I should do something about it. In order to act on that, you do need rajas. You do need the element of movement and agitation. In order to act, we need rajas. In order to rest, we need tamas. But in order to think clearly, we need sattva. Do we have any questions about the gunas? For anybody who was not on our last series of discussions. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just reading it.
Yeah, so I just put in a lot onto the slide, right? Because everything on this planet we can identify as having qualities of these three gunas. The food that we eat, we have food that energize us. We have food that gives us a lot of energy, like or stimulants like caffeine that can make you feel energized, but then lead to tamas as soon as the effects wear off. We have other foods, we have other things that make us feel very bloated, very heavy, very lethargic. They dull the mind. There's drugs and alcohol, etc., that can dull the mind. There's so much, and every food, every food has one of these three effects or one of these three attributes. And also, like when we think about emotions and mental states, etc., they all can be, we've all been in that rajasic mood, that state of being supercharged and energized. And sometimes it's very powerful if we can learn to direct that energy, right? The direction comes from the sattva, but if we can direct it, it can lead to positive action. This is again where karma comes in. Positive action, where we can do something that is positive. But the same rajas can lead to anxiety, hyperactivity, can lead to us going around constantly being busy without no real aim or purpose. So, while we're always, in terms of, and when we start talking about the asanas, right, like strength and sculpt classes in the mornings, the morning classes are to a certain degree rajasic classes. They actually push up your heart rate. They warm you up. They're activating, they're stimulating your sympathetic nervous system so you can get up and you can face the day. the Maya release class is deeply tamasic. It puts you into a state of deep, deep, deep relaxation. After a Maya release class, and if you've done realigned, you go to bed and you almost, fall into this lull, and the next morning you wake up and you feel slightly comatose when you wake up. And then, certain parts of sort of like Yoga Nidra, the advanced Yoga Nidra, is about sattva. It's about restful awareness. All physical signs of being asleep, but you're consciously, calmly conscious.
Just going back on the point that Poonam made a couple of minutes ago, I suppose one would never appreciate sattva if the rajas and tamas weren't part of your life. Does that make sense?
No, definitely.
So that's what Poonam was saying, that you need to experience that as well to get to that point. So people who haven't experienced rajas or tamas don't know what it is to live.
Well, you see, the thing, it depends on how you experience rajas or tamas.
Okay, but I'm just reading the summary there.
Yeah. No, but definitely, in order, we say that, sattva, because it's purity. This is, I think I started saying, sattva, because it's purity, we all sort of aim towards sattva, towards getting that calm balance. But you can only get that calm balance if you also have rajas and tamas in balance. You see, if you were sattvic, you'd be very calm and peaceful. If you allow rajas to control you, then it can have a negative impact. If you allow tamas to control you, it can have a negative impact. So the aim here is to always try and keep them in balance. Understand when you need rajas. This is where the discrimination comes in again. Understand when you need rajas, understand when you need tamas, and understand how to balance them to bring harmony into your life. So
it's actually a balancing act amongst all of those.
It's a balancing
rather than striving to one.
Well, so it's a balancing act. However, in order to get that clarity of thought and clear discrimination, or the ability to be discriminative, positively, to discriminate well, you have to achieve that sattva. To make the right decision, you need to get sattva, because as soon as there's fluctuations or there's extreme drowsiness, you're not going to think clearly. But once you have that clarity of thought, then you choose whether to then have the coffee because it's going to give you the energy to get what you need to do done, or have that long, deep sleep because you actually need to rest so you can work twice as hard the next day. Does that make sense?
I think without the clarity of thought, the sattva, and a clear understanding of your objectives and where you're going, you can waste a lot of time doing rajas.
Yeah.
Randomly, which I think I might have done most of my life. Totally in rajas, moving around, getting things done, one objective to another, but are they getting you to final goal, whatever your final goal is? But how do you know? Come on, how do you know at 18 what your final goal is anyway? Doesn't everybody do that? Do some roundabouts and route turns and...
Yeah, and in terms of growth, that's important. It's important, but the thing is, yeah, when you don't know, but once you do know, see, once you understand this today, then if you don't pay attention to it tomorrow, include it in your life, then that would be disadvantaging yourself, because you now have the knowledge. You have the ability to ask yourself, is this sattvic, rajas, or tamas?
But you still, if you don't know, you haven't got that clear final goal yet.
If you don't have that clear final goal, then you have to spend a little more time developing sattva so that clear goal emerges.
Okay.
So yeah, so this is it. Also, you know, when we have the clear goal, we also realize how we need to balance the gunas. What proportion do you need? You know, if I'm taking part in if I'm doing a marathon, yeah, I need my rajas to be higher than my tamas. And I need, you know, I don't want to just, you know, go into sattva. I mean, so, like when I run every morning, I like to run in a sattvic state. That's why I like to run alone. I don't want there to be any competition. I don't want my mind to be distracted. I just want the clear, calm mind and just in harmony with my body, running, easygoing, balanced, peaceful, content. But if I was taking part in a marathon and competitive, then I want rajas. I want to focus on that end goal and I want to get there in the shortest possible time. So it's about deciding how you want to balance, you know, for the goal that you want to achieve, how are you going to balance the rajas and tamas? And also knowing that if I've spent a lot of time in rajas, then the only way to compensate for it is to go into tamas, give my body a chance to heal before I find my sattva again, before I find that inner balance again. So the proportion as well, you know, once you have this calmness of mind to decide what the purpose is, what the intention is, you know, remember we talked about intention last week in a few of the other classes. Once you know what the intention is, what your current intention is, and you've done that with clarity, then you know how to allocate these gunas in your life. Does that make sense? Because when we talk about asana, this is what we're talking about. So the 46th aphorism, asana is the perfect tone of the body, steadiness of intelligence, and benevolence of the spirit. Whenever asana is performed, it should be done with the awareness, steadiness, and endurance in the body, intelligence in the mind, and goodwill in the heart. So basically, all asana should be nourishing and illuminating. So the aim of asana is to help us achieve sattva. And the reason we practice asana, like in the morning classes, even in a Surya Namaskar or in the Strength and Sculpt, or you know, any asana that actually stimulates the sympathetic nervous, you want to push yourself. But in that building physical endurance and strength, you also want to find the sattva. You also want to find that inner peace, because at the end of the day, you only know an asana when that asana becomes relaxation. So what you're doing is you're building endurance. So the strengthening asana, the morning asanas are all about building endurance, building power. But while you're doing that, you're also able to maintain that inner sattva. Does this make sense? Because now we're just talking asana.
I'd quite like to understand that benevolence of spirit, please.
So when he talks about, you know, in terms of, you know, when it's about, you know, spirit, I think what we need, the way we need to translate it as potential, you know, the underlying reality that goes beyond material, that allows all the material objects in the entire universe to form and to change. And this is it. I think this alludes to Ruth's question, you know, can we ever change? Can we change the material structure? Yes, we can't change the past, but we do have the ability to change the material structure of our body. You know, if we live in this world of spirit, in this world of potential, the subatomical structure of the universe, if we understand that, then with regular action, we can achieve the benevolence of the potential of this potential universe, the underlying reality. This, I don't know how to actually explain this without bringing in quantum theory, etc. But basically, when we talk spirit, when we translate the word as spirit, I think what we really should be doing is calling it potential. If we think about material on a continuum of material to potential that we go through, we have the potential, and if we work with that potential, the potential then becomes the new material, physical universe. That's how this change continuously happens. Does that make sense, Seema?
Yeah, so the asana is really the physical form in getting you to sattva.
Yes. So the asana is basically, yes, getting into sattva, working through those limitations, breaking the barriers, the physical barriers in our bodies.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Did we have somebody else that asked a question? Okay. Now, when he talks about asana, steadiness of intelligence and benevolence of spirit, but this asana very often 46 gets taken to mean that any comfortable posture is suitable. There's a few schools that would use the sutra to say, when he says the asana is correct when it becomes comfortable or relaxed, right? Many have taken this like, so any posture will do, anything, you sit any way you want to. But I think the Vyasa translation says yoga asana requires posture, bhogasana is for comfort, so it's not the same thing. What he's talking about here is you follow the steps to have the correct posture, but that correct posture should become comfortable. That's what asana is about. From the first sutra, Patanjali tells us that yoga demands the highest attention to perfection. You need discipline, and you need to pay attention, and you need to apply the practice, this discipline, to every asana practice. So every time we practice asana, we have to, it has to be mindful. It has to be in the now with awareness. Yoga is not about putting on your headphones, having blaring music, and losing yourself in a high active energy class. It's about acting with awareness, being aware of every single movement of your body. With yoga asana, the mind has to be involved. This is the only way to retrain the fibers, muscles, and tendons in your body. This is the only way to reshape, rebuild your body, to change that material structure. Does that make sense? This was just basically Vyasa's translations, or Vyasa's addition to Patanjali. Now, the 5 functions of every asana needs to be cognitive, affective, intellectual, and intuitive or expansive. We're going to discuss that. Now, the cognitive, let's start with cognitive. Cognitive part of the brain compares ideas and thoughts. Now, how we think about things, what we're thinking. And the affective deals with our emotions, how we feel about it. And cognitive means the attitude we have, how, the attitude that we have influences how we act or behave, how one acts on thoughts and feelings. So within the asana, there are times, we had this conversation a little earlier, there are times when it feels challenging, where if you don't watch yourself, you get frustrated with yourself, you get upset with yourself because you can't perform the asana, or it's not working for you, it's not easy for you. So you actually need to actually understand, try to pay attention to why are you having those feelings? Where are those feelings coming from? Or is it just cognitive? Is it just ego driven that you need to do a handstand or you need to do a headstand? And we need to, taking both of those into consideration, you need to decide how to act to correct your behavior so that you can focus in the here and now and on that asana in that moment. Does this make sense? Because, that's the whole thing with the inner awareness, is to understand, well, we're trying to still the thoughts, but the thoughts do arise, especially when the emotions kick in. When we start feeling the frustration or the disappointment or, sometimes the tiredness. And this is where the whole thing is. If you're too tired, then it's better to go into Shavasana, to go into child's pose, than to frustrate yourself with trying to go on. And this is where, this is the whole idea of the rajas or the tamas that comes in. Sometimes in the middle of an asana practice, you do need, to go into tamas. You do need to take a few moments to rest and then come back. And the whole idea of the intellect is, to a certain degree, to understand the theory behind asana, to understand why we're doing asana. Why do we do each posture? Why are we doing Bhujangasana? And why is Bhujangasana, that's cobra pose, different from upward dog? How is it different? And are you doing the correct thing? One's a strengthening pose, one's a deep stretch pose. So from an intellectual point of view, you need to understand the differences. And you need to understand, once you understand the differences, you actually start to understand what you need to do. And then with regular practice, we develop this intuitive ability. You see it sometimes, people don't even need to hear the instructions. They can just follow the flow, follow the sequence. And this is when the asana becomes meditative. Does this all make sense? You see, because asana is weird, it is a physical practice. We're doing something physically with our body. But we can't do it mindlessly, because then it isn't asana. Then it isn't yoga. See, asana can be yoga, but if it's mindless, then it's no better than just stretching, just simple stretch. It's not yoga. So you really go ahead.
I really enjoyed that period when we did smaller classes and we talked about each pose in detail and what it was doing to the body and where it originated from. So that was really found that I really enjoyed that, doing the research, talking about it and learning about it and watching. The asanas meant just that bit more after that, if that makes sense.
Definitely. I think if you understand why, where it came from, then it does definitely make sense. If you understand, why we do Garudasana, why we do, well, yeah, it's called eagle pose, but why we do, if you understand where that comes from, then it also gives you an idea of what you should be doing with Garudasana. Why are we putting one leg on top of the other? What are we trying to stretch? What are we trying to reach for? So yeah, it's definitely, I think that's important. I've tried to do, I do this on Instagram a lot more, try to share the story behind each asana. But it takes a lot of time in a yoga class to explain it, but it is definitely worth paying attention to why we're doing the asana. Definitely. Any other questions or anything you want to add on? So, Sutra 47. Perfection in asana is achieved when the perfection to perform it becomes effortless and that infinite stillness within is reached. So asana only becomes yoga when that infinite stillness within is reached. So same thing. Asana becomes or helps decrease the fluctuations of the mind. Now, he also then goes on to tell us how to achieve the perfect asana. And I think this is the important bit. Asana should be performed without creating aggressiveness in the muscle spindles or the skin cells. Space must be created. You know, it's always about lengthening, finding the space in your body. So impulses flow freely between muscles, tendons, ligaments, and the skin. This comes from the idea, even at that point, that the skin sends impulses to the brain, which allows refinement of the asana. So this is beautifully explained in the very, very early text about, finding length and how it's muscle, tendons, bone, and skin. But I think, the person who actually really, really explains all of this well is Iyengar in his book. So if anybody reads Iyengar and you want to understand this, then it makes a lot of sense. For me, the whole idea is very important. It also explains the multiple facets of my life and why, for me, the skincare and organic apothique directly ties in with the yoga, because I don't want to use anything on my skin that's going to compromise my perception or the impulses sent through to my body. And this whole idea that as asanas are refined, as we pay attention to our asana, refine them for our bodies, feel that inner stillness, they automatically become meditative. And when the asana becomes meditation, the practitioner becomes undisturbed by dualities. Your entire being unites in perfect posture, state of bliss and freedom of consciousness. So, that's the whole idea of asana. The whole idea is exactly, understanding the gunas, understanding your body, paying attention to what's going on, what's required, what's needed in that moment. And also understanding when you need to rest. Do you have any questions?
So this state of bliss, does that extend beyond the practice, or it's in that moment?
So this is the entire thing, when we achieve that state of bliss, like with samadhi, it can be only when you're doing the practice, but if you practice it enough, then you extend it into all of your life. So, there can be a point. Ideally, that's what we want. We want to do the asana, and that sets us in this positive mindset, this blissful state for the rest of the day. Or you want to do your evening practice and, stop all the fluctuations of the mind, so you have that deep, restful, blissful sleep. So we want it to continue into the rest of our lives. Life becomes yoga in that case. It's not just for the moment. Yes, we practice it in the moment, constantly in the moment, because then that moment extends to the next moment, extends to the next moment, extends to the next moment.
Can you achieve bliss and walk away from suffering, or at least pain, or even pain? You can't walk away from pain when people that you care about are not also in a blissful state.
See, the thing is, if you're in a blissful state, right, you can be completely empathetic, you can be completely loving, or you can be harsh if the situation requires that you're harsh, but it doesn't move you. You do not get lost in their emotions. So you become a more loving person, you become a kinder person because you're in a blissful state. So yes, and you know, in the long run, that has a knock-on effect on the people you love. But yeah, so you can be in a blissful state and in a world that isn't blissful, with people around you that aren't blissful. It takes more work initially, but when you are in that state of bliss, then you won't get caught up in the emotions. And you can actually be more, you can be there, you can be present in the moment to actually be truly empathetic. Because we all aim to be empathetic, right?
Do you not think, even though if you might be empathetic, from what Poonam is saying, that you might come across as being cold and indifferent to the person who doesn't understand where you're at in your journey? Sorry to use that word.
So, you know, I think yes. See, the thing is, how do you want to appear to that person? Do you need that person to see you as somebody who's making an objective decision? And yes, whenever we objective, I mean, the reason we like scientists is because they don't get caught up in the emotion, right? We like some scientists, and then we disrespect some people, you know, because they got caught up in the emotion. So are they being factual? No, but the thing is, what do you want to appear as? Do you want to appear as the objective person in that moment? Because if you are blissful, you can also be the loving person. You can choose to be the loving person if they need the loving person.
So isn't there guilt as well? Because if you're in bliss and they're suffering next to you and there's somebody you care about, don't you feel guilt that you've got the bliss and they haven't? And maybe there's only enough bliss in this world, you know, is there
No, see, this
like
is
it.
It's not. You see, every single one of us, every one of us can be blissful. It's the other things that we add on that takes away the bliss. If we get rid of the other things, we're all in a naturally blissful state. It's these decisions, it's these limitations, it's these memories that we hold on to of what is good and what is bad and what's negative and what's positive that causes the disharmony.
So when you are in company of people who are blissful, often those who are very much at peace with themselves, you can actually feel being there, you can feel it. So if you become blissful, we are not there yet, but if you, then the person next to you will have some impact of that. Because when we go to these you know, the places of worship, lots of times you can pick out the people who are actually so much at peace with themselves. And yeah, so just being there makes you feel very different.
Rekha, I agree with you on that, because even when I just used to go to the temple, just sit in peace, I think that I totally agree with you, but I think what Poonam is saying is a bit more personal, you know, people that are part of your everyday life. I totally agree with you that if you're around people who are calmer, more gentle, more giving, that, you know, you're caught up in that and you are one of those people, and like-minded people end up being surrounded by. You end up being with those sort of people, I think, and you attract those sort of people. So I totally get where you're coming from. You're one of those people, Rekha.
So, but also you understand that just as we get caught up by people who are blissful, they make us feel blissful.
Right.
If you are blissful, you'd have that impact on the family members. So it'll only be a matter of time before they get blissful too, or feel the bliss in your presence.
Sorry, I joined late.
Mhm.
So I've just been listening to everybody. It's quite interesting. I don't pretend to understand it all, but I look at it from the perspective of, I suppose if I take the sort of job I do, I probably deal with some quite challenging stuff most days of the week. So if I don't maintain calm and almost a feeling of feeling good myself, I can't cope with that, and I can't then be empathetic and support those people or help people through those struggles. So I sort of liken it to that. I don't know if that's the way you should think of it, but that's how I think of it, what you're saying.
Definitely. You know, exactly that. You know, you have to take the bliss, or you have to take your calm to actually be empathetic, because when we're agitated, we can't be empathetic, because, you know, in an agitated state, in a rajas state, I'm the most important person in the world and I don't care about your problem. That's a rajas state. You know, and a tamas state, I just want to sleep and focus on my luxury, so I don't really care about. So you almost need to create that state where you calm within, exactly as you said, Debbie. And absolutely spot on. You need to bring that calm, and it has a positive effect on other people. So we almost have to do the things that enable us to feel the bliss, and then take it out into the world. And this is, you know, this is the main reason for practicing yoga. Specifically, if you're new to asana, is to yoga, is the reason we practice asana, because asana's a very physical way for us to find that peace, for us to burn out the anxiety. You know, if we're hyper, do the classes that gets rid of that hyper energy. So when we face the world, we can face the world in calmness. If you're prone to tamas, then do the practices that actually give you the energy that you need so that you can be present in the moment. Sorry, I'm just trying to tie what you just said, Debbie, directly back to asana.
And I try to do that in my mind. So I try to, when I'm doing yoga, I try to create that peace in my mind, because I am, probably heard me say it before, I'm a bit, not frenetic, but I'm a doer. I'm not a very good relaxer. So I don't stop my thoughts running. I don't stop myself and slow down. I've always got to be doing something, if you like. I've got to get things done, and that's the way I am. So the yoga helps me to rein that in a bit, and become a bit calmer. And I suppose then, but then in another way, I don't have that problem when I'm at work, because I naturally gravitate to that. So I suppose training myself in yoga means that I can maybe bring it into my own life a bit more, rather than I've trained myself to bring it into other people's lives. That's how it feels anyway.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think the most important thing is, like, you know, be the change you want to see. The whole Gandhi philosophy. If we can be the calmness, then we're the calmness for ourselves, because we see the benefits. That's the intrinsic motivation. And it also enables us to do the things that we need to do in a calmer state, and that has external implications. You know, this is where we come back to karma and the positive actions. You know, any action from an agitated state, is it positive? Really, when we think about long-term repercussions.
I think that the yoga helps it for me personally. So I'm learning to, I suppose, be calmer.
Be calmer, yeah.
For my own benefit, if you like, not for somebody else's all the time. Whereas I've learned to do it for other people in a different way, I guess.
Yeah, so
I may have got the wrong end of the stick here,
no,
but that's my perception of it.
That's you're absolutely right. You know, the whole thing is, you know, yoga is a personal practice. It is a personal practice. You know, it's about knowing that we can change our lives, that we can do the things to reach our highest potential. And the best thing that we can give the world is being our best selves. That's the best we can do. Nothing else, nothing else actually is as valuable as that. And so, yeah, so this is the whole, every aspect of yoga is just about finding, working on yourself. It's all about self. It's all about self-reflection, self-discipline, self-work, self-progress, self-care.
And probably most of us don't spend enough time doing that stuff because we think it's almost a selfish act.
Yes.
And actually, whilst it benefits us, it can also benefit other people if we become that little bit so-called selfish, I call it. It's not, but and take that time to get ourselves to that place.
Definitely. Definitely. So self-care is never selfish. I think that's important for everybody to remember. Self-care is never selfish. If you need to take time to do something for yourself, we can only truly care for others when we're healthy. Going back, to this to the Maslow and the D needs and B needs, etc. Where are we coming from?
You often see people in life who have to care for somebody else, if you like, on a practical basis, almost burning themselves out through this desire to be all things all of the time. And then obviously in the end that doesn't pan out the way that the other person needs it to happen, or the person that's giving the care, because they're worn out.
Definitely. One of the things that that we sort of, I'm not sure when in life it happens, but we start to see self-sacrifice as a virtue, and prioritizing others as the virtue, to our own detriment. And in truth is, eventually we all will burn out. It's not, yes, it's very, very, if you have the capacity to, it's very, very important to share your skills, to share your ability to serve. But if you're doing it to your own detriment, then it's self-defeating. Because we all will reach that point where we burn out, even if it is to the point that we're just burned out and the world can't benefit from our unique ability anymore. So I think, that's the whole thing, is about doing what we need to stay healthy, so that we can always give our best to ourselves. When I say give our best, I mean give our best in every moment to ourselves and to anybody else around us. So next week we're talking pranayama, and it goes on from here to a little more internal. We start talking a little more about our energies, our energy levels, etc. And I think it starts to make sense, because I think to a certain degree the gunas and this whole inner care, I think when we start to understand our energy and how our bodies work, and the reason we breathe the way we do in yoga, then it sort of makes a little more sense, because at the end of the day, what we're doing, and if we do it well, we succeed, is manage our own energy, our own resources. And while doing that, we build resilience and endurance, so that we can do, if you want to, you can do more without straining your body. That's part of a physical practice in yoga as well. So you build endurance, so your capacity goes up, so you can do more without stressing your body. Yeah, so we'll talk a little more about pranayama next week. And I am way over time, so I'm going to sign off. So thanks for joining me. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.